It was just another day in that busy city square, where the sun beat down fiercely and people walked by without looking much at their surroundings. There, a man in old clothes with a rickety wooden cart tried to sell his goods. His face, although marked by the years, wore a calm expression, almost invisible to the young people who walked by hurriedly and with disdain. They, with their designer sneakers and expensive sunglasses, soon stopped, but not out of interest, only to mock. They laughed out loud, pointing at the cart that looked ready to fall apart and the worn clothes he wore. "Is that all you have? Are you going to sell something with that old cart?" they said amid laughter, lightly shoving him, not knowing that every word pierced deeply. The man did not raise his voice, did not defend himself. He simply smiled in silence, as if he knew something they were still unaware of. They never imagined that this simple street vendor harbored a secret that, once revealed, would leave them speechless. After the young people walked away, still laughing and commenting on the scene as they left, he began to carefully gather up his cart. But just before leaving, one of the girls, still mocking, said with disdain, "Hopefully you have more than a cart and torn clothes." Then the man did something unexpected. Calmly, he maneuvered the cart to open a kind of hidden panel at the back, revealing a small digital screen that no one could have guessed was there. His hands, steady and sure, pressed several buttons, and a secret hatch opened in the ground next to the cart, revealing a narrow elevator that slowly descended into darkness. The eyes of the young people, still peeking from around a corner, grew wide, their arrogance replaced by surprise. This man, who seemed so ordinary, was hiding behind his humble facade, something that defied all logic. Intrigue grew in seconds. Who was this man, really? What was beneath that apparently normal square? While the bystanders fell silent, he went down with the calm of someone who knows exactly what he is going to find. And when he disappeared, the impossibility of the scene made them question what they thought they knew about appearances and true wealth. Why would a street vendor have a secret bunker and sophisticated technology? The answer was about to explode in a twist. No one in that square would ever forget. But to understand everything, we must go back and learn a bit more about that man and how he came to that strange moment. He was not just any street vendor. His story, his choices, and what he hides are about to be revealed. And I assure you, you won't be able to stop listening. Because what seemed like a simple episode of public humiliation contained the most powerful lesson of all. Wealth is not always measured in money or clothes, and true power shows itself when least expected. The street vendor was named Salvador. At first glance, he looked like someone from another era, with his ironed yet worn shirts, pants that had seen better days, and shoes that knew every corner of the pavement. His cart was full of sweets and drinks, old and common to anyone passing by every afternoon. But behind those eyes, there was a life of secrets, of decisions that had taken him much further than those youngsters could imagine. Salvador didn't seek fame or recognition, but he didn't let contempt define him either. Today, however, that contempt was about to change his fate and that of those who underestimated him. The young people who ridiculed him were not just ordinary kids, but the children of rich and powerful families, used to getting everything with money and treating others as lesser. For them, a man like Salvador was someone to ignore or mock. That's why they found it amusing to make his day a spectacle of humiliation. They approached laughing, making sarcastic comments while he tended to them without raising his voice. But Salvador knew that this moment was a turning point. He couldn't allow rage or sadness to take hold of him. Instead, he decided that this event would be a lesson for everyone, including those arrogant people. As he packed up his things after the mockery, many in the square watched the scene with curiosity. There was silence, mixed with uncertain looks and a touch of involuntary shame from those who witnessed the insult. But no one imagined what would come next. Salvador pushed his cart toward a little-seen corner, near an old graffitied wall, and with unexpected skill began to open secret compartments built into the cart's structure. First the digital screen drew attention, then the floor opening with a sophisticated mechanism. His calm was in stark contrast to everyone's surprise. It was as if this man had not only been hiding secrets in his life, but also carried a hidden world beneath his feet. The suspense in that moment cannot be compared to anything else. The young people tried to keep their composure, but their faces said it all. None of them could believe what they were seeing. A story that seemed to be about poverty and humiliation was transforming into something deeper and more disconcerting. Salvador slowly descended in that elevator, letting the crowd in the square wonder what it all meant, and how it would change their perceptions of true greatness. The square, an ordinary place, became the stage for an unexpected revelation. The secret kept by the street vendor was a doorway to a world that no one until that moment could have conceived. How many people like Salvador go unnoticed every day, hiding something beyond the visible? What happens to our minds when we let ourselves be carried away by appearances and clothing without knowing the story behind them? These questions began to settle in each mind as Salvador descended to his hidden refuge. Meanwhile, the young people began talking quietly among themselves, with doubt and fear. They were confronted with something that challenged their reality, and their arrogance slowly began to crumble. But what exactly was in that secret place? Was it the hiding spot for a treasure, a laboratory, a refuge, or something that went far beyond what they could imagine? The uncertainty became almost unbearable as they waited for the moment when Salvador would return and reveal his truth. It is precisely at this point that the story opens a new chapter full of uncertainty. What seemed to be just another conflict of prejudice and mockery transformed into a deep mystery about who we are and what we choose to value. Because what comes next, when Salvador comes out of that refuge, will forever change the lives of all who were there. It will not only be a revelation about him, but a mirror for all of us, a lesson about the true measure of respect and dignity. The tension keeps rising. There's an expectant silence in the square as people crowd around the cart and the open hatch. The sun continues to set, but now with a different light, almost as if reality itself had changed. Everyone knows they are about to witness something that transcends the ordinary, something beyond apparent poverty or wealth. Salvador is about to show them a side of himself no one had imagined, and a truth that will upend their entire perspective. Who is Salvador really? What is the extent of his secret? What will he do once he comes back up on that hidden elevator? These questions keep everyone hanging on the edge of their seats, as if about to discover something that could change their lives forever. And while this happens, the clear message begins to settle in. Never judge someone by their appearance, because out there, right beneath the surface, there might be a sleeping giant waiting to surprise you. In that silence laden with mystery, the echo of an ancient truth can be felt. Appearances deceive, and some stories just need a moment to change the time and place in which they occur. Salvador, the street vendor who was mercilessly ridiculed, is about to prove that true worth isn't found in how things look, but in what every soul keeps beneath its skin. And when he comes out of that darkness, everyone will know they've witnessed something extraordinary. All that remains is to wait and see. The story is only just beginning. It seems that I don't have the previous text of the story to continue. Could you provide it to me? That way I can write the continuation coherently and following the instructions. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone judges you by your appearance without knowing anything about you? Imagine a group of wealthy young people crossing paths with a humble-looking street vendor, mocking him and casting him aside, and just when everything seems lost, that man reveals something that leaves them speechless. This is the story of how appearances can be deceiving, and how the greatest surprises come when you least expect them. It all began on an ordinary afternoon in a neighborhood not expecting anything out of the ordinary. Among modern buildings and shiny cars, there he was, a simple man dressed in worn clothes and pushing an old cart, dragging it through dusty streets. His name was Don Julian, a street vendor who at first glance seemed invisible to the fast-paced world around him. But it only seemed that way. That same afternoon, a group of well-off young people, dressed in the latest fashion, cheerful and defiant, approached Don Julian's cart. Their eyes showed surprise, but also mockery. One of them, leading the group, let out a laugh that echoed between the buildings. "Look, does anyone really live by selling things in that filthy little cart? Isn't there anything better to do in this rich neighborhood?" The words cut through the air with a clear intent to humiliate him. The others followed with dark comments, mocking his old clothes, his disheveled appearance, and his slow way of speaking. No one expected a reaction. No one expected resistance. But Don Julian, with a disconcerting calm, just gave a slight smile, while those young men fell into their game, hurling insults disguised as jokes. They had no idea they were about to witness a twist they would never forget. The arrogant laughter began to slowly turn into uncomfortable murmurs. Don Julian fell silent for a moment, his gaze lost beyond the cart, as if he were guarding a secret about to be revealed. He raised his head, looked at each of them one by one, and said firmly, "Let me show you something." What happened next forever changed the way they saw that man, without further warning. He walked away from the group and headed toward a narrow alley just a few meters away. The young people, confused, followed him without understanding. There, just where no one would have expected, something began to emerge from the shadows. Suddenly, after a few seconds of silence, a deep and powerful roar broke the everyday calm. The young men's eyes grew wide, caught between confusion and astonishment. There appeared a gleaming, imposing car, a classic model restored with obsessive perfection. It wasn't just any car. It was a 1967 Chevrolet Impala, one of those cars that looked like they just came out of a museum, with details betraying years of care and passion. But the surprise didn't end there. Don Julian walked toward the car, still wearing his humble clothes, but his demeanor had changed. The young people didn't know what to say. How was it possible that the man who sold sodas from a tattered cart could have such a treasure hidden away? Humiliation shifted to disbelief. As they silently inspected the vehicle, Don Julian started to tell a story no one could have imagined. Though he looked like a modest vendor on the outside, he had been a restorer of classic cars, a true artist of the engine. He had chosen the path of humility to live in peace, far from the noise and hypocrisy of high society. One by one, the young people fell silent, watching how that dim figure acquired new light with every word, every gesture, but the most unexpected was yet to come. Don Julian opened the door of the Impala, and inside there wasn't just shining leather and metal. On the passenger seat, carefully placed, there was an elegant envelope. It was a letter addressed to anyone who needs to believe in second chances again. What it contained was a mystery, a message that went far beyond appearances or money. That day, the group of rich young people faced an undeniable truth. Not everything valuable is seen at first glance, and sometimes the greatest treasure is hidden beneath layers of humility and patience. When Don Julian started the engine and the Impala roared powerfully toward the sunset, he left behind not just an old cart, but all the preconceived notions those young people had about success and dignity. And you, have you ever judged something or someone without seeing the full story? What secrets do you keep hidden beneath your appearance? Don Julian's story is just beginning, and what happened next still leaves everyone speechless. If you want to know what happened when those young people followed Don Julian and how a simple car changed their lives, stay with me, because it only gets better from here. The next part will take you straight to the heart of this mystery, which is full of twists you never imagined. In the meantime, remember, never underestimate someone just by how they look. True stories are told with the soul, not with clothes or possessions. Ready to discover what comes next? Because this story has much more to reveal, and believe me, it will leave you speechless. Never underestimate someone because of their appearance. Listen carefully to this story, because what you're about to discover here might completely change the way you look at the people who walk beside you on the street. A simple man, wearing worn-out clothes and pushing an old cart, who to a group of rich young people was nothing more than a perfect target for mockery and humiliation. But the hidden truth behind his silence turned out to be the most unexpected twist of all. What if I told you that this street vendor holds a secret so deep it left those who ridiculed him speechless? Imagine the scene. A sunny day on one of the city's main avenues. 4 young people dressed in the latest fashion trends walked confidently, their laughter echoing with contempt. Right on the corner, the street vendor, a man with a tired yet calm gaze, offered cold drinks and snacks from a cart that, to them, was simply a perfect target for ridicule. They mocked his tattered clothes, his slow steps, and above all his old, battered cart, without knowing that hidden behind that facade, there was something that would make them rethink everything they thought they knew. Why would someone like that, with so little on display, hide such a big secret? Let me tell you how it all started that day, how superiority turned into astonishment, and how a simple action by this man forever changed those young people's perspective. But first, let me introduce you to the main characters in this story. The street vendor's name is Don Ernesto, a man of about 60, weathered by the sun and a lifetime on the streets, known in the neighborhood for his honesty and discreet smile. The young people, well, they are the typical picture of youthful arrogance. Independent, dressed in brands, convinced that their wealth set them above others. That combination of humility and arrogance was what sparked this story. From the very first moment, the young people, through disdainful looks, sarcastic remarks, and even the occasional gesture that made their intentions obvious, to ridicule Don Ernesto. Is this how you live? With that 40-year-old cart? They laughed out loud. Don Ernesto didn't reply, but he looked at them with eyes that seemed to hold secrets, thousands of stories, and a determination no one expected. He seemed used to such attacks, as if he knew that one day he would show who he really was. What nobody suspected was that this moment was much closer than they ever imagined. I bet that at some point you've seen someone and thought they could never surprise you, right? That's how these young people felt. They couldn't have been more wrong. When they finally decided to continue on their way, planning to leave the pathetic street vendor behind, Don Ernesto did something that stopped them all in their tracks. With a calmness that contradicted his appearance, he picked up his cart with precise movements and began to walk away. But not at the slow pace they expected, no. That old cart seemed to hide something else, something that was about to change the story completely and leave his detractors speechless. And right as he turned the corner, in front of the astonished eyes of the young people, a metallic flash emerged from the cart. A silent engine started up beneath the rusted bits, and what looked like an ordinary cart transformed into a powerful, modern, almost futuristic machine. The young people, paralyzed, couldn't believe their eyes. That humble man actually had the most luxurious, fast, and sophisticated vehicle they could ever have imagined. Where did that come from? How could someone in those conditions have something so extraordinary? Suddenly, Don Ernesto sped up and vanished into the streets, leaving the group in utter shock. For a moment, their faces went from mockery to disbelief, then to shame, and finally to reflection. They had not only judged wrong, they had ignored the story that man carried, and above all, a secret that wasn't visible at first glance. Don Ernesto, the street vendor, wasn't just selling snacks. He was a living example that appearances are deceiving, that beneath the surface there can be a life full of achievements, sacrifices and surprises. Every word the young people said, every cruel laugh was buried in that instant, swept away by a reality no one expected. But what led Don Ernesto to hide something so impressive beneath a humble appearance? Why keep such a low profile when he could show off his true life? That question lingered long after the man and his cart disappeared from sight, and it will be the force that drives everything that follows in this story. It wasn't just a technological secret, nor a hidden luxury. Don Ernesto had a story behind him that gave meaning to everything. The story of a man who, despite achieving things that few could even imagine, chose humility, hard work, and simplicity. He chose to stay in his neighborhood, recognizable to everyone, needing no bragging, because he knew something those young people were just starting to grasp. True greatness doesn't lie in what you show the world, but in who you are when nobody's watching. Imagine the impact of that moment if you were to live it yourself, seeing how someone you least valued proves to you that they were far above you, not with words, but with actions. That's the strength of this story. From here, things won't be so simple, because what seemed like an ending is only the beginning of Don Ernesto's mysterious past. A past the young people never could have imagined, and that they'll have to confront within their own ways of thinking and being. So get ready, because this doesn't end when that cart disappears down the street. What comes next is a journey through kept secrets, through moments that strip away prejudice, and through a man who, without seeking recognition, gave them the greatest lesson of their lives. Do you want to know what happened next? What the real reason is that Don Ernesto chose that life? Why he hid such a different world beneath his appearance? Don't miss it, because just when you think this story has left you speechless, what comes next will surprise you even more. One thing is certain, next time you see someone who appears humble, you should look deeper. You might be standing before someone with a story you can't even imagine. Don Ernesto already proved it, and his truth was etched in the silence he left behind. But the story is not yet complete. There is still much to discover. And I assure you that every step we take together will reveal a deeper layer of this story that defies everything you think you know about success, dignity, and true wealth. Remember, it's not always the one who looks best who is worth more. Sometimes the greatest treasure is buried exactly where you least expect, like in an old cart that actually holds an entire world inside. Do you want to keep going with me to find out? Then don't go away, because in the next chapter you'll discover what was behind that hidden life, and why, in spite of everything, Don Ernesto chose humility as his banner. What happened next is even more powerful, and it'll make you rethink many things about judging others. So stay tuned, because this story is just beginning. Have you ever judged someone just by their appearance, only to find out you were completely wrong? Today, I'm going to tell you a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about first impressions. Imagine a street vendor, dressed in worn-out clothes and pushing an old cart, being mocked by a group of boys who think they have it all. But what nobody knows is that behind that humble man, there is a secret that will forever change the way they see him. Do you want to know what it is? Then stay with me. It all starts on a sunny Saturday afternoon. The neighborhood square was buzzing, full of life and people passing by without paying much attention to the rickety cart parked in the corner, barely holding together with a few boards and rusty wheels. There was Don Ernesto, a man with graying hair and hands weathered by years of work. His stand of fruit and sweets looked at first glance like just another street shop. But today, something felt different in the air. A group of young people showed up, dressed in brand-name clothes, phones in hand, laughing loudly and casting disdainful glances at Don Ernesto and his cart. "Look at that cart. It looks like it's going to fall apart any minute," one of them said. "Does anybody really buy that old stuff?" replied another as they approached, making hurtful jokes without hiding it. They didn't care about the hard work that man was doing. To them, he was just an object for their amusement. Don Ernesto looked at them calmly, neither raising his voice nor responding to their taunts. He seemed to simply ignore their insults, but his eyes shone with a mix of sadness and something else, something no one could quite grasp, because to that group he was just another second-rate street vendor. But just as the youths were about to walk away, triumphant in their mockery, something unexpected began to happen. Some customers watching the scene started asking about those little details on the cart that no one had noticed before. A barely visible label, an odd component on one of the wheels. The mocking youths now looked at each other, confused. What was that? A sign that not everything was as it seemed. Don Ernesto, with a firm and steady voice, announced that he had to go. But before leaving, he promised they would know the truth. The group insisted, not understanding. When the charismatic man walked away with his cart, everyone was left frozen, unable to imagine what they were about to discover. Behind that old cart, there were not only fruit and sweets, but a machine, a technological device that looked straight out of a science fiction movie. As the young people walked away, their thoughts circled around that little phrase Don Ernesto had left them. Not everything you see is real. What could that mean? But the surprises didn't end there. A few minutes away, in a hidden spot, the cart transformed into something else. Something impressive and exclusive, worthy of the rich and powerful, the very ones who had just been humiliating that man. The tension grew. Curiosity exploded, and every second that passed ensured that no one would ever forget this story. What secret was Don Ernesto hiding? Why did he allow himself to be ridiculed? And more importantly, what would happen when that secret came to light? This is just the beginning. If it already seems unbelievable to you, get ready, because what's coming will blow your mind and completely change the way you see the world. Don't miss the next chapter, where what seemed obvious turns into something extraordinary, and the impossible becomes reality before your very eyes. Can you already imagine what that cart could be hiding? Trust me, no one saw it coming. Don Ernesto's story is more than a lesson about prejudice. It's an invitation to open your mind and realize that sometimes true treasures are hidden right in front of us, disguised in the simplest way. So stay tuned, because soon we'll reveal a twist that not even the most skeptical will be able to deny. Who do you think Don Ernesto really is? You'll find out very soon. Stay connected, because the truth, as always, is more incredible than fiction. What is most striking at first glance is how people judge without stopping to think. There he was, a street vendor with already worn-out clothes, stained with dust and years of use behind him, pushing a cart that seemed on the verge of falling apart. But for that group of well-off young people passing by the corner with their haughty smiles and disdainful looks, he was simply an easy target. Look at that outfit. Is he really still selling stuff like that? Came a timid mockery, barely a whisper that did not go unnoticed. The derision began to grow. Wouldn't it be better if he went somewhere else? He gives a bad image. He probably doesn't even know what he's selling. He doesn't have money for a better cart. Light laughter, gestures of contempt, whispers that turned into an almost unbearable murmuring. The man said nothing. He simply watched them, his gaze steady, calm, as if that string of mockeries was unable to touch him. The curious thing is that behind that humble appearance, that facade everyone despised, something was shining with a hidden edge. No one could see it yet, because only prejudice was at work and the overwhelming haste of youth. But life tends to have curious ways of balancing things, and that afternoon would be no exception. The young people, feeling like owners of the world and the street, stopped near the cart. One of them, perhaps the most insolent, approached and asked a question in a haughty tone. "What do you sell here?" "Still with this? No one buys from you. You'd better leave." His voice trembled, perhaps from the boldness running through his veins, but also from the fear that sometimes arises when you challenge without knowing whom. The vendor simply shook his head serenely and answered, "What I sell is value, not in appearance, but in what each person is willing to discover." The words fell like a bucket of cold water on those young people, but none of them expected such a response. They laughed, mocking, convinced it was just empty talk. However, just as they began to walk away with slow steps, the man began to close up his cart with unusual precision, faster than anyone with an old cart should be able to. His face, until now unchanging, then showed a determination that cut through the air. Without warning, he pulled from among his belongings a small device that glimmered with a soft light and a metallic texture that had nothing to do with his humble appearance. The young people froze. "What's that?" they asked, not daring to move. The vendor smiled, a smile that wasn't mocking but belonged to someone who knows he has kept a well-guarded secret. "This cart isn't just a cart. I'm not just a vendor. Today, what I have in here changes everything you thought you knew. If you want to stay, you can see it with your own eyes. Between disbelief and curiosity, several young people decided not to leave. They stayed, exchanged glances, and for the first time it occurred to them that maybe this man had something worth knowing. Then, as if activating a magical mechanism, the cart began to transform. It shifted a few inches and, to everyone's astonishment, changed shape and size until it revealed a dynamic, futuristic structure. What had been the sordid and worn-out image of a street vendor vanished to give way to a state-of-the-art technological machine. It was not just a van, not even a regular vehicle. It looked as if it had come from a science fiction movie, with LED lights along the edges, panels that opened to reveal touchscreens, and perfect inner mechanisms in motion. "Where did you get that?" exclaimed one of the boys, unable to contain his amazement. "And why were you hiding it?" The man looked at them deep and serene and replied, "This is my real business and my true resources. I did not come to impress anyone who judges me only by appearances. But I also know that many lose their chance to learn because they only look at what's on the surface." His voice was firm, teaching a lesson the young people did not expect. They, who had defined themselves by image and appearance, now were forced to reconsider their notions. Then the vendor drove that machine to a nearby spot and activated a series of features that left everyone speechless. The vehicle was not only impressive on the outside, it had amazing features, from advanced communication technology to equipment for supporting and developing high-impact social and economic projects. "This vehicle is my way to reach more people, to grow and to help without losing sight of who I am and where I come from." It sounded almost like a challenge, a reminder to those who, in their comfort and privilege, had forgotten that true wealth also comes from authenticity and humility. The group fell silent, speechless. What for them had only been a man down on his luck was suddenly an example of perseverance and cleverness. There were no excuses, no masks, no falsehoods. Simply a man who never allowed his appearance to dictate his destiny. As evening fell and the city lights began to shine, the young people understood that what truly defines us is not the clothes we wear or the cart we push, but the story we carry inside. And sometimes that story is more valuable and surprising than any luxury facade. But the story did not end there, because just when they thought they had seen it all, the man put away the technological cart and with a calm voice delivered a phrase that confronted everyone. "Do you want to know how I got this? Or would you rather go on believing that I'm just another vendor?" At that moment, the tension rose again, because behind that futuristic machine there was an even deeper secret. A secret that would forever change the way those young people saw the world and themselves. No one expected that any ordinary day in the square would end with the lesson that would shake all their certainties. Perhaps that's why, when they saw him arrive with his rusty cart and clothes that seemed to drag the years behind them, no one knew what to expect. But what happened next changed everything. How did a simple street vendor go from being the butt of jokes to leaving speechless a group of young people who believed they had it all? Stay with me, because this story is just beginning, and I promise you, it's not what you imagine. On a bustling corner, right in front of an elegant cafe, a man with a calm gaze and steady hands pushed his old cart, full of fruit he bought early at the market. Around him, a group of well-dressed young people mercilessly mocked his clothes and humble street business. They called him Old Rat and laughed at the cart that seemed about to fall apart. But they didn't know who that man really was or what he hid behind his tired smile. The street vendor, who went by the name Don Mateo, kept his composure in the face of their provocations. He knew that little or nothing they said could reach the hidden truth behind the wrinkles that lined his face and the dirt that had settled in his fingers. The square was nothing more than a stage, and his cart a mask. At every joke thrown his way, he would merely purse his lips slightly, leaving a small space for doubt to grow among those who thought themselves superior. While the young people kept laughing and shooting disdainful looks, Don Mateo simply tossed them into the air as if they were smoke. Nobody understood why he didn't defend himself. It seemed like a lost game. But what they didn't know was that the facade they scorned was the last thread connecting them with what was about to be revealed, something that would turn all their ideas upside down. Because that apparent humility hid something that few would dare to imagine. The sun continued its path, and the tension on the corner grew with every step the young people took around the cart. They'd get out of their car, take selfies while jeering at him, and even dared to touch the fruit with scorn, just to test Don Mateo's patience. They laughed at his rough hands and his stories of hard days. But someone, amidst the group, started to notice something strange, an almost imperceptible gleam in the street vendor's eyes, as if something unexpected was brewing inside him. Suddenly, one of the young men rummaged through his wallet in boredom to buy a piece of fruit, but tossed the money onto the cart with contempt, without even looking at Don Mateo. That act was like a spark that ignited the vendor's calm. In a firm voice, but without losing its softness, he asked them to please show respect. He was not an aggressive man, but his words carried weight. Then, while everyone expected him to explode or give up, the vendor did something no one anticipated. He turned off the humble light of his cart and smiled with a hint of irony. "You have mocked me for my cart and my clothes. I've heard it all. But I didn't just bring fruit here," he said, as he turned and pointed at a large vehicle parked a few streets down. The young people, incredulous and still with nervous laughter, followed Don Mateo's gaze. What they saw left them speechless. There, gleaming under the evening sun, was a luxury car, a classic model that could compete with any modern supercar. Don Mateo had never wanted that part of his life to show. Nevertheless, the humiliation and arrogance of that group had stirred something inside him, a need to open the door to his other reality. "This cart and my clothes are part of me, not a shame. But this car, friends, is a reflection of the price I've paid for the society you so harshly judge," he added with a calmness that contrasted with the surprise and silence of the young people. Questioning glances were exchanged in that instant. How could someone selling fruit on the street own a car like that? Where had he come from? And more importantly, why had he chosen to have that old cart if he could live with the comforts so many of them enjoyed? Don Mateo closed his eyes briefly and began to tell a story he had never shared in public. Now holding everyone's attention, linked to that car and his humble appearance, was a deep secret, a double life that reflected much more than a simple choice. Years before, he had lived in two separate worlds, in an almost impossible balance between the wealth he'd accumulated and the roots he never wanted to forget. While the young people stood frozen, every word from Don Mateo struck them like an invisible dagger, revealing uncomfortable truths about themselves and their prejudices. "You underestimated me because you believe value lies in appearances, in labels, or how shiny what you own looks," he started. "But you don't see the real value in effort, in the humility that truly forms a person. This cart is more than old wood and metal. It's a symbol, a reminder of where I come from and what got me here." His voice grew firmer, making it clear that this was no excuse. It was a declaration. The young people looked at the old cart with different eyes, yet disbelief started to show on their faces too. Was it too good a story to be true? The tension began to build again, and for a moment it seemed they might laugh once more. But then Don Mateo, with a slow gesture, took the keys of the classic car and gently tossed them onto the cart's table. The metallic sound echoed in the square like a gunshot, leaving everyone breathless. "This car you see there," he continued, "is the car with which I won a race no one believed I could run. Not because I'm rich, but because I refused to take shortcuts. This cart is where I learned to value work, and that car is the prize, not the beginning." The story began to unfold in layers that seemed more fantastic than real, as if the street vendor were much more than just a simple man on the street. The group of young people finally drew near, one by one, and asked in lower voices, almost ashamed. They wanted to know how he achieved all of that, and what motivated him to live that double life. Don Mateo told them about his youth, when an accident and a decision drove him to the extremes. About how money hadn't changed him, but had given him the tools to help others like him who lived on the margins. Leaving opportunity each day in a fruit cart, each answer raised more questions. Why keep selling fruit if he could live differently? What sort of pride or philosophy kept him loyal to that identity? Now the silence was more respectful, while the square filled with a different air. Don Mateo seemed much more than the figure they had scorned, and his words challenged each of them to question their own prejudices. The story wasn't yet over, and with every phrase, mystery and admiration mixed into a cocktail impossible to stop listening to. Don Mateo's real car was not just a luxury vehicle, but a symbol of resilience and wisdom that money and appearance could never buy. For the first time in a long while, the young people found themselves face to face with someone who had defeated them without raising his voice, but with the strength of truth. As evening fell and the lights in the square came on, no one wanted to leave. Don Mateo, keeping his secret with the dignity he was known for, knew that today something had changed. Beyond luxury or poverty, beyond an old cart and a gleaming car, that lesson would remain ingrained in each of them. Because sometimes true stories aren't told with extravagant words, but with silent gestures that force us to look within. When he finally stored the cart away and headed to his gleaming car, leaving behind a group of young people who now looked at him with different eyes, it became clear that this day was the beginning of something new for everyone. The humility, wisdom, and courage hidden behind a simple appearance had left them all without a coherent word to say. And do you think you've learned anything from Don Mateo? Don't forget, because in the next part, the true reasons behind his double life will come to light and surprise you even more than this initial revelation. Don't miss it. Have you ever seen someone dressed in worn-out clothes, pushing an old cart, and thought that person had nothing interesting to say? Before you judge, wait until you hear what happened with this street vendor and that group of young people who couldn't believe what happened next. Because sometimes appearances can be deceiving, and what looks like just a man down on his luck hides a secret that will leave you speechless. The story begins in a vibrant city square, a place where people from all walks of life gather. There, amidst the hustle and bustle, a middle-aged man in shabby clothes with a rickety cart was selling sweets and soft drinks. The young people who arrived at the square that very afternoon quickly noticed his presence. With laughter and disdainful looks, they approached to make fun of him for his appearance and the old cart he was pushing. What they didn't know was that beneath that humble facade hid a secret that would completely change the image they had of him and leave everyone speechless. The stage was set. On one side, the street vendor, calm, meticulous with his cart, almost invisible to those who didn't want to see him. On the other, a group of young people with designer clothes, the latest cell phones, and a dismissive attitude, convinced that life smiled only at them. The conflict was clear: mockery, arrogant looks, and careless laughter. But this is where the real game began. What was that man hiding? Why did his gaze show not even a hint of bitterness? And what would happen when he left the place? While the young people laughed, made cruel remarks, and even recorded videos to post on their social networks, the street vendor remained calm. In front of them, he seemed like just another man trying to earn a living. But little by little, details began to appear. The way he meticulously cleaned a small plaque hanging around his neck. A subtle glimmer in his eyes when someone accidentally brushed his cart as they passed by. A discreet gesture of someone used to keeping a secret. The young people ignored all of this, too busy feeding their own disdain. But those small details were setting the stage for what was about to happen. What happened next was something nobody saw coming. Just as the crowd began to thin out, the street vendor stood up with an almost majestic calm, left the cart in a corner, and pulled a small remote control from a bag. In that instant, a growing noise began to fill the square, catching everyone's attention. The young people, incredulous and confused, watched as from within the old, dirty structure of the square, an imposing, gleaming car with flawless design emerged, a vehicle straight out of a science fiction movie. It wasn't just any dusty old car, but a machine restored with luxury details and technology they had only seen on TV shows. The reaction was immediate. The arrogant faces turned to pure astonishment. The vendor, now with everyone's attention, slowly opened the car door and, with a smile worthy of a CEO, invited the young people to take a closer look. His voice, deep and confident, revealed that he hadn't always been a simple street vendor. He explained that he had been a famous engineer, and after a business downfall and a personal decision, decided to live simply, keeping a hidden life that no one would have imagined. He was a man who, despite appearances, had resources and knowledge that could change any life. Questions started flying around in everyone's mind. Why would someone with so much talent and money choose this life? What pain or story was behind that transformation? As the young people tried to process all the revelation, the vendor offered them something that left them even more baffled. He proposed a challenge, an opportunity for them to change their own perspective and stop judging by appearances. But just when it seemed the story would settle down, a new twist appeared. The car was not just a symbol of wealth, but the center of a surprising technological mystery, with features and secrets that would defy everyone's imagination. Indeed, the day that started with ridicule ended as an unforgettable lesson. Nothing was what it seemed, and everyone in that square had to reconsider not only how they saw that man, but also themselves. But the story doesn't end there, because as the vendor elegantly walked away, leaving the young people still dazzled and speechless, one question lingered in the air. What other secrets did that man keep? And what lessons could he bring to those willing to look beyond appearances? This is only the first part of a story that will make you reflect on the real value of people and what truly matters in life. Will you stick around to find out? The morning began like any other in the busy city market. Phones shining, superficial laughter, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee floating in the air. Right there, amid the friendly chaos of buyers and sellers, Don Ernesto was pushing his old cart, the street vendor that no one looked at twice. His appearance was modest, almost invisible. Worn clothes, weathered hands, and a face lined with stories never told. But that day, something was changing without anyone noticing. Or maybe they did. A group of young people who looked like they'd just stepped out of a fashion and extravagance catalogue stopped with scornful laughter right in front of Don Ernesto. Their gazes were like knives, stabbing into every wrinkle of his clothes, every dent in his battered cart that looked more like a rusty tricycle than a sales stand. Seriously? That old cart? And those clothes? Don't you have anything better to show, Grandpa? Mocked a girl wearing headphones and an impossibly expensive designer bag. Her friends laughed, raising the volume of their contempt. Don Ernesto lowered his gaze for a moment, the silence weighing heavier than any insult. He did not reply, not even in anger. He just smiled, a small but firm smile, like someone keeping a secret they're not willing to reveal. Maybe because he knew appearances are deceiving, and that moment would inevitably have its price. But no one could imagine how much. The young people began taking selfies next to the cart, striking exaggerated poses and making mocking comments. One tried to touch the bicycle with disdain, pretending disgust. Another loudly asked what he was selling, betting there was nothing worthy even of a taste. Probably stale candies or overripe fruit, he said sarcastically. Don Ernesto said nothing. He simply stayed there, assisting those who actually showed interest, those customers who saw beyond appearances. But the real story began to unfold when the last cruel joke echoed in the air. When the young people finally decided to leave, convinced they had won that little battle of scorn, Don Ernesto did something none of them expected. With slow but confident movements, he turned off the small radio attached to his cart and, with a voice that started soft, almost lullingly said, "Before you leave, I'll show you something you couldn't guess, even in your wildest dreams." Frowning, the young people stopped in their tracks. The surprise left them speechless. The man, who seemed nothing more than a humble vendor, unlocked some hidden clasps under the seat of the old cart and began to dismantle parts with astounding precision. Within minutes, he had transformed that broken-down cart into a device that looked like it had come out of a sci-fi movie. Tiny lights turned on, moving parts clicked into place, and as if it were a race car, it started with a silent but powerful roar. The young people stared open-mouthed as that little, modest man got into a small but sophisticated car, with aerodynamic design and impressively advanced technology. It wasn't just any car, it was a prototype model, something rumored to exist only in research centers and worth millions. Don Ernesto, still with his slight smile, told them, "This car is not for display. It's to show that not everything valuable can be seen at first glance." Disbelief echoed on their faces as they watched the supposed ridiculous old man accelerate gently, leaving a trail of awe behind. "Who are you, really?" one of them muttered, unable to close his mouth. But Don Ernesto, before disappearing into the traffic, just raised a hand and added, "True wealth is much more than what you wear or the cart you push." In those moments, the looks that once dripped mockery were now bathed in a silence full of respect and confusion. The lesson, although late, was etched into the memory of those young people who had believed a common man could not have extraordinary secrets. And while the sun kept shining down on that market, no one could help wondering what other surprises Don Ernesto might be hiding beneath that simple appearance. Maybe the real lesson was that value is never where your eyes expect to find it, but where courage and wisdom have installed it without many noticing. But that is just the beginning of something much greater yet to be revealed. What else could that man be hiding who had forever changed the way people saw things in that market? The answer, as always, was just around the corner. Never judge a book by its cover. It's a phrase that sounds overused, almost cliché, but it never stops being true when you least expect it. Here is the story of a street vendor, a man who seems ordinary at first glance, just another forgotten face in the city. What that group of rich teenagers didn't know is that their mockery of a man for his worn-out clothes and old cart would completely change the way they saw the world. And, above all, what they thought they knew about him. Do you want to find out why that man was hiding something that left them speechless? Stay tuned, because this story is just beginning. The tension was palpable on that sunny midday when that group of spoiled teenagers, used to comfort, crossed paths with the vendor. He, with his rusty cart and tattered apron, offered fresh fruit with a shy smile, moving with that calmness that only someone who knows daily struggles can have. But to those teens, he was nothing more than a perfect target for mockery, a prop to make them feel powerful, strengthening their bonds through contemptuous laughter. What secrets did that man keep? Why didn't his calm gaze falter in the face of their humiliation? The answer was about to shatter their most steadfast beliefs. The place seemed like any other street corner in any city, but it had a story of its own. The neighborhood, a mosaic of different lives, woke up each morning to the rhythm of the vendor's hustle, who, with every fruit he handed over, wove an invisible web that few could understand. The group of elegantly dressed teens approached the cart, intending to score hits on social media. Those laughs, that air of superiority, everything recorded with the latest smartphone as if it were a trophy. The vendor, a man with calloused hands but a serene look, didn't say a word. His silence only provoked more irritation, because an easy target like him was supposed to yield to shame, right? The teens began their taunts. His old clothes, the cart that looked about to fall apart, the way he spoke in that low, almost timid voice. They laughed at his fruits, exaggerating their touch, their colors, everything. "Who would buy this here?" they said, live streaming as they accumulated likes and comments, celebrating their humiliation. But there was one detail no one noticed, a small spark in the vendor's eyes, as if he was guarding a secret map, an ace up his sleeve that not even privileged youth could ever suspect. As the group grew bolder, the atmosphere shifted from electric to uncomfortable. Because this vendor, with a simple movement, began to trigger a series of unexpected reactions. He didn't raise his voice, didn't defend himself with words, but started silently manipulating the situation. What was that? A carefully measured response or part of something bigger? Nobody could have imagined that behind this ordinary man was a hidden story. A secret that would put their arrogance to the test and forever change the dynamic between them. Just when they thought they owned the moment and their mockery had reached its peak, the vendor did something no one saw coming. Without a word, he slowly gathered his cart, waved with an unexpectedly warm smile, and walked away. But the real surprise came when he started his car, a shiny, exclusive vehicle of immense value. That was when the teens were left frozen, silent, their laughter choked by disbelief. What kind of man was this, the one they had so carelessly judged? And more importantly, what other truths were they willing to recognize? The story doesn't end here, because that revelation wasn't a period, but rather the beginning of something much deeper. The street vendor wasn't just hiding a material secret, but a lesson that went beyond appearance and prejudice. Are you ready to discover what lies behind that serene smile and what lesson he left those teenagers? Don't miss the next chapter, because what you think you know is about to change forever.